The news comes to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories. With the news at this time, I am Deanna Jordan. A very good morning to you. First, the lead stories. The Working People's Alliance and the People's National Congress Reform have mixed views on the issue of power sharing in Guyana. An electoral problem may have been the cause of a devastating fire on the island of Wakenham. In regional news, several divers in Trinidad have died after they were sucked into a pipeline. The Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda is challenging critics to bring evidence to prove that he is corrupt. For the international news, we'll bring to you the latest bulletin from the BBC World Service. The details of these and other stories will be coming up right here in just a moment.
A COVID-19 PCR test is now mandatory for many routine activities, including travel and return to work purposes. At Eureka, our trained and experienced staff will ensure confidentiality while your test is conducted in a professional and timely manner, with results in just 48 hours. So the next time you require an efficient and hassle-free PCR COVID-19 test, call 624-8378, 608-8378, or 623-7233 to schedule your appointment. You can also ask about our house call testing service.
And now the news in detail. The Working People's Alliance, WPA, wants the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, funded report that recommends power sharing to be used as a springboard for a campaign to realize that goal. WPA executive member Takuma Ogunse tells Politics 101 that while the U.S. is now pushing power sharing for its own interest, that model of governance should be given an opportunity.
I'm saying there's a coincidence of interest at this present moment. There was a divergency between our internal interests and the Trump administration. I think with the coming to power of the no coincidence of interest, and we have to play this to our advantage and to the advantage of the country. So even though the initiative may be driven by U.S. interests, we got to convert it into national interest.
He says the aim is to end political gridlock between the race-based political parties and create the opportunity for the use of Guyana's resources for the social and economic benefit of all. Also appearing on Politics 101 was People's National Congress Reform Representative Elso Low. He fears that executive power sharing can lead to increased corruption.
As much as I understand the sentiment towards power sharing, and I think there needs to be serious discussion around how we move forward, I ultimately think that it is not a reasonable position to take to think that Guyana's politicians, no matter the party, are altogether trustworthy. I think that all of us are subject to temptation, and I think that the strongest institutions possible will help to ensure that instinct towards temptation is mitigated.
But WPA executive member Professor David Hines says the need for executive power sharing goes beyond merely fighting corruption.
As a black man, and a pro-black man, I am angry that black people who have slaved for our country, who have given their blood, cannot share in the oil wealth. And so therefore, any system that brings them at the table to decide, they're at the table to make that decision. We can talk about structural problems later. I want that money that is coming from the oil wealth for my people to also have a share.
WPA executive member, political science professor David Hines. President Irfan Ali is off to Belize for the annual midterm summit of the Caribbean Community CARICOM leaders. Among the issues to be discussed is pushing ahead with the CARICOM Agri-Food Systems Agency with emphasis on regional and nutrition security. CARICOM Secretary General Carla Barnett says agriculture is at the top of the agenda.
it's a good area for investment at this point in time, using new technologies, green food production, for example, moving away from the old way of using a lot of pesticides and that sort of thing. That's a big thing because there's a growing demand for it globally, and it's healthier. Therefore, yeah, food security on top of the agenda.
CARICOM Secretary General Carla Barnett. Guyana's president is responsible for agriculture in the Caribbean quasi-cabinet. The government is closely monitoring the welfare of Guyanese scholarship students in Moscow, Russia, following that country's invasion of Ukraine. Guyana's Foreign Secretary, Robert Passad, told reporters on Sunday that the 11 students remain unscathed in the country's capital, Moscow. Passad was at the time speaking on the sidelines of the unveiling ceremony for the 50th anniversary logo to commemorate half a century of bilateral friendship between Guyana and China at the Cliff Anderson Sports Hall, Homestretch Avenue, Georgetown. Passad said the Minister of Public Service, Sonia Parag herself, is taking the direct involvement in updating and interacting with the students. The Foreign Secretary said the government's wish is for the calamity to remain under control. However, he added that the administration is already crafting measures should things get worse. Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Hugh Todd, has already met with the Russian ambassador to Guyana, where the issue of students' welfare was raised. Russia last week launched a devastating attack on Ukraine via air, land, and sea. Police and fire service investigators believe that yesterday's fire that destroyed a house and several stores on Wakenham was of electrical origin. 54-year-old Anil Rambaran, who owned the ANC business enterprise located at Belplain, Wakenham, told police that he and his wife, Chandrauti, were asleep when they heard neighbors screaming. Mr. Rambaran says he got up and realized that smoke was emanating from the shop. He says he and his wife quickly escaped through their back door and ran out on the road and watched as their entire home was engulfed in flames. Neighbors pumped water from a nearby trench to prevent the fire from spreading to nearby houses. Police say no one was injured. Former prominent Georgetown businessman and a politician, John Simon de Freitas, has died in Madeira, Portugal. He had migrated to Portugal several years ago. The People's National Congress Reform, PNCR, says he was an advisor to the late party leader and President Desmond Hoyt on private sector matters. He served as PNCR Member of Parliament from 1998 to 2001. After parting ways with the now defunct family business, Central Garage, he migrated to Portugal to unite with his relatives, whose descendants had come to the then British Guyana as indentured laborers. And now, news in the region. In Trinidad, the chairman of Paria Trading Company, Newman George, has confirmed that 4 missing divers are now dead. They are Faisal Karban, Kazim Ali Jr., Rishi Nagasar, and Yusuf Henry. The announcement was made last night. The men were sucked into a 36-inch pipeline on Friday while doing maintenance work. Newman said the mission has moved from one of rescue to one of recovery of bodies. The Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, says there is no room in his government for corrupt politicians. Accusations are being leveled against him and his government as that Twin Island nation prepares for general elections widely expected this year. Antigua Newsroom reports that Mr. Brown is challenging his accusers to prove that he is corrupt.
I guess the issue of corruption will always arise in the sense that people will always make these claims, but what they need to do is to bring the evidence to support the claim. And I can guarantee there's no such claim. And I'm satisfied that our governance framework is strong. The commitment from the cabinet, all of my colleagues, the commitment is extremely strong to ensure that there's no abuse of public resources as what we saw happen under the UPP administration.
Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has declined to condemn Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Reuters news agency reports that he effectively departed from his government's official stance at the United Nations to say Brazil would remain neutral. Bolsonaro, a far-right populist, recently snubbed U.S. entreaties not to visit Putin in Moscow ahead of the invasion. He also angered Western allies by saying he was in solidarity with Russia without elaborating. On Friday, Brazil voted for a draft UN Security Council resolution that would have denounced the Russian invasion of Ukraine, despite reluctance by Bolsonaro. Russia vetoed the resolution. In Sunday's press conference, Bolsonaro said Brazil will remain neutral in the conflict, noting Russia and Ukraine were practically brother nations. Asked by a reporter whether he was willing to condemn Putin's actions, he said he would wait for a final report or see how the situation is resolved before giving his opinion. He added that he was against any sanctions that could bring negative repercussions for Brazil, citing Russian fertilizers, which are crucial for the country's giant agribusiness sector. In reference to Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky, Bolsonaro said Ukrainians have placed the hope of their nation in the hands of a comedian. And now for the international news. Here's the latest bulletin coming from the BBC World Service.
Hello, I'm Debbie Russ with the BBC News. Russia's central bank has more than doubled its key interest rate as sanctions begin to take effect. On the fifth day of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the bank said it was taking the emergency measure because Russia's economic situation had changed drastically. The move follows further sanctions from Western countries on Sunday. The BBC's Jenny Hill is in Moscow.
The ruble has sunk to another record low. The Moscow Central Bank, Russia's central bank, has doubled its key interest rates from 9% to 20%. There have been queues at some cash points around the country for several days now as people try to get out as much cash as they can. But I think your average Russian probably isn't noticing too much of a difference right now. That will, of course, change. Bear in mind, though, that very many people here in Russia get their main information from state television, which continues to celebrate and support Mr. Putin and his war in Ukraine, not that that's what they're calling it.
As countries across the world impose further sanctions on Russia over Ukraine, China has reiterated its opposition to the economic punishment of Moscow. On Monday, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said Beijing was against what he called illegal and unilateral sanctions. He urged both Russia and Ukraine to engage in talks and not to escalate the situation. China is one of Russia's closest friends and has refused to call Moscow's actions in Ukraine an invasion. The Ukrainian military says it has repelled repeated attempts by Russian forces to storm the outskirts of the capital, Kyiv, where there were a series of pre-dawn explosions. In the southeast of Ukraine, Russian forces have taken control of the Black Sea town of Berdyansk, and fighting is reported in the city of Mariupol. There has been also fighting in Kharkiv and Dnipro in the east. Residents in Kiev have emerged from a 2-day curfew. From there, James Waterhouse reports.
The people we see this morning are taking advantage of a curfew being lifted. They are not being asked to line the city as a human shield, let's put it like that. There are people going to the shop to try and replenish what are limited supplies, food, drink, that includes fruit, which starts to go off after 5 days of living underground. We've seen other queues at supermarkets as well. And just to give you an idea of the contrast of life now, we've seen someone going for a jog just behind me towards St Michael's Square, and at the same time we heard automatic gunfire towards the Maidan, towards Independence Square.
The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has urged Russian troops to lay down their weapons. In a video address, Mr. Zelensky also called for the European Union to grant Ukraine membership of the bloc immediately. He was speaking just after a Ukrainian delegation, including the country's defence minister, arrived at the border with Belarus to take part in peace talks with Russian representatives. Earlier, a Russian negotiator said Moscow wanted to reach an agreement. World News from the BBC. The United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva has agreed to hold an urgent debate on Russia's invasion of Ukraine amid widespread international condemnation of the attack. In a recorded statement, the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, said Russia's military operations in Ukraine were leading to rising human rights violations, and he said the UN was monitoring them with teams on the ground. Meanwhile, Mr. Guterres has warned that a major report to be published later on the impact of climate change is a stark sign of what humanity is facing. The study by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is expected to give the most pessimistic assessment so far of the effect of rising global temperatures. Mr. Guterres urged governments to act.
The emergency of climate change, pollution and nature loss poses a threat to all human rights. Today's report on adaptation from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is another death knell for the world we know. Floods, droughts and rising sea levels will lead to even greater humanitarian catastrophes, food shortages and migration. Up to 1/5 of the planet could be too hot for humans to survive.
Almost 20,000 homes have been left underwater in Australia, where days of torrential rain has caused record flooding. At least 8 people have died. The latest victim was found trapped inside a submerged car. Tens of thousands of people have been told to leave their homes in Queensland and New South Wales. A Ukrainian crew member of a luxury yacht owned by a Russian businessman has admitted trying to sink the vessel. He accused his employer, who's the chief executive of a Russian arms firm, of selling weapons that killed people in Ukraine. The multi-million-dollar motor yacht was docked in Mallorca in Spain when the mechanic opened valves in the engine room. He was charged and released on bail. He told a judge on Sunday that he regretted nothing and would do it again. BBC News.
The news came to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories.
Don't let the fear of contracting the coronavirus disease deter you from seeking the medical care you need. At Eureka Labs, we ensure the safety of our clients and staff with our rigid sanitization routine. This involves the use of ultraviolet lights to effectively rid the air and all surfaces of viruses and bacteria that may be present throughout the lab daily. The light works to rapidly inactivate microorganisms through a physical process that is invisible to human eye. So the next time you need a checkup, don't hesitate to give us a call on 225-7574 to schedule your appointment.
To end the news, here is a recap of the leads. The Working People's Alliance and the People's National Congress Reform have mixed views on the issue of power sharing in Guyana. An electrical problem may have been the cause of a devastating fire on the island of Wakenham. In regional news, several divers in Trinidad have died after they were sucked into a pipeline. And the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda is challenging critics to bring evidence to prove that he is corrupt. And that's the news to the moment.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.